Chapter 301, this is the foundation. Now this isn't the foundation, this is the piece of ground that we've created, ready to build everything from. So you've seen what the finished article looks like. This is where it all starts. Okay, the below ground works. So any project that you're working on, whether it's on sandy ground, on rock, then you'll need some sort of foundation, or at least the ability to drill into maybe a hard rock so you can put your building onto it. This one is probably going to be something like medium density clay. We've got a simple strip foundation, and then we'll be putting the CMU blocks and filling those in with concrete as we build up our courses. Now, obviously, I'm making massive assumptions here that this is going to be suitable for our needs, but always consult the structural engineer or ground worker, or in the UK, maybe the building control officer can offer advice, but you'd need to get some sort of report done on the ground, especially if it's in an area where previous buildings have been. It may be a brownfield site, as they're referred to, might have had underground works. So very, very essential that you check out what you're building on before you build it. There might also be contamination that needs to be stripped away. Okay, so this is what we have. It's a nice clean piece of ground, and we're just going to grab our footing and put it in. So all the bits that we're going to be using for this are already made. So it's just a question of assembling this and understanding the process in which it all goes together. I've made certain assumptions. I've made some design decisions that might or might not be correct as we move through. And as you look at these sorts of things and start to appreciate a bit more how they go together, then maybe you can make your own assumptions and modify the design to suit. There's never one solution to any of this. This is just my interpretation of something that would probably work at a push. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is on our components, click on the details button. That's going to load up this little menu, open or create a local collection. And then on the exercise files that we've downloaded, find that location, go into chapter 3 and then chapter 3 components, select it, and then select folder. That's then going to load in all of these components. So if we come back up to this one, the C25 strip footing, and click on it, bring it in to our project, just drop it somewhere. And then we need to click on this back corner and pop it into this corner here. Okay, so that's the first bit done. Okay, not too onerous. What we're going to do is try and line everything up from the back edge, and then we'll stagger these back from the front edge so we get a sense of how this thing has gone together. Okay, so that's it. Next up, we're going to be putting the blocks in. Now we are going to sort of array those and stagger them. So that'll take a little bit more time to do, but that's our foundation in, ready to take the blocks. Chapter 302 are below ground blocks. We're going to put a couple of courses in to start off with in this lesson, then we'll finish them off in the next one. So the first thing we need to do is bring in our CMUs. So we've got the hollow block half and the hollow block. So we'll start off with the hollow block half, just drag it in, and then we can use the back edge, so the midpoint of the back edge, line it through with the midpoint of our footing. And then we're going to move it up on the blue axis 10 mil. If you're using the Imperial template, it's 3/8 of an inch. So I'm using metric, so I'm going 10. Okay, so that's the first bit in. Then we're going to use this CMU hollow block, and we're going to drop this in like so, and go from endpoint to endpoint, and just drag out another 10 on the green axis. So we've now got a joint. We're not going to fill the joints in. We'll just leave them open. It's fine as a demonstration, but obviously working on site, these will be filled with mortar. That gap there will be filled up as well. What we're also going to do, because these are below ground blocks, we're going to use a hollow infill. Okay, we're going to drop that in, and then we're going to nest it using the outliner tool. So again, just pick that up, drag it in, then move this corner to this corner, like so, and then just slide it down so it fits nicely into the block. Now, I want to be able to select this, and the thing inside it, this infill, this bit of concrete, is going to come along with it. So if I go to my outliner tool just sort of scroll up to this bit, I can see that this is the block, which is this one, and this is the infill, which is this thing here. If I drag that to the underside of the hollow block, it'll nest inside. Now, if I select the hollow block, the whole thing gets selected. Okay, so that's a really useful trick using the outliner tool. Now, we're going to copy this from the back point of this half block to the forward point of this full block, and then we're going to use the *8 or the star command to create an array, and we'll make 8 of them. So I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to use the move tool. I'm going to scroll in. I'm going to click at this point here. Okay, the half block, not the full block. Tap the control key. That's the Alt option on the Mac, and then snap to the forward point of that. That then creates my block. If I then type in *8, enter, I've got my array. Okay, so that's a really nice way to do things. Now I'm going to grab these. So I'm adding to the selection by using the control key. It's the Alt or Option key on the Mac. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit the move tool. I'm going to tap my control key, Alt Option on the Mac, and then click at that point and bring them up to this point. And then with them still selected, up 10 mil or 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so that's that bit done. So there's our starter. What we could also do at this point is put in our ladder mesh. So we can click on that, and that's going to bring in this mesh. And I'm going to just move in, scroll in to this point. And again, this is not an exact science. We'll line it up, I say about there. And I'll just move it up if I can, like a fraction, something like that. So it's going to sit within the joint. In reality, it would be bedded into the mortar. I can then make a copy of this. Again, using the move tool feature. So lock it out on the green axis by putting your finger on the shift key. And it doesn't have to touch, it just has to kind of line through. If I wanted to drag this out a bit more, I could. And then finally, I'm going to come down to my reinforcement. So rebar, this thing here, and I'm going to spot that sort of somewhere in here. It doesn't have to be, again, accurate. It's more of a rule of thumb. And I'll just slide this down. So I'll click on that point and come down to about there. Okay, so that's fine. I can drop it down a bit further if I wanted, so it goes into our footing. Okay, in reality, you might have starter bars coming out from here, and then you can connect the two up. Or you might put this into the foundation when it was going off, and also put a whole string of them along here, and then just keep adding extra bits of rebar if you needed them. So we might as well, with this selected, use the move tool, click on this corner point, and then come to this point here. So that's 2 clear, and then the next one. Just go *3, enter, and that'll then take us to there. So that's more than enough for this lesson. And the next lesson, we'll finish off this wall, and then we'll be ready to put the backfill in. Chapter 303, I'm going to finish adding the extra courses to the wall. So we need 6 courses in total. So I'm just going to select the blocks as best I can. So I'm going to do a window grab around them. And that's picked up these 2 bits of rebar as well. I suppose I could have come in sort of this way and just grabbed like that. So that would have been better. Use the mesh as well. You need that ladder mesh in there. And we'll come around to this back edge. And with the move tool, let's make sure we pick at this top of the footing, not the bottom of that, because we want to include this joint in our selection. So click there, tap the control key, come up to this point. So we want to lock out on the blue axis. So that's either use the up arrow on your keyboard, or use, once you're on the blue axis, put your finger on the shift key. That's going to lock it out. I'm going to come to this point. That's given me the extra joint as well. And then I'm going to type in *2, enter, and that's given me my 6 courses. Okay, now I don't need on top the ladder mesh. If I can grab that, I can get rid of that. So I don't need the ladder mesh because this is where we're going to put our sole plate or our mud sill. Okay, so that's where that belongs. But before we do that, we're going to start dealing with the slab. We haven't got any crawl space under our building because I'm kind of building this in Canada. It's going to be a bit nippy up there, especially in the winter time. So I'm just going to have a sort of a much more insulated building than normal. And often you don't necessarily put in crawl spaces, or if you do, then there's ways of dealing with them, but you don't have to have a crawl space under there. So I'm having a ground bearing slab on a sort of graded backfill. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, and we'll be starting that off in the next lesson. Chapter 304, we're going to prepare our slab base. Okay, so this is earth, and it wouldn't necessarily be as smooth as this, but we've also got this sort of bit of batting back at this point. So we're going to fill this area with some hardcore. This will then sort of support the wall a bit more. On the outside, we'll have a similar thing. We'll sort of have a compacted grade on the outside as well, backfill. And we'll also be putting the drain in as well here. Okay, the perimeter perforated pipe, which is going to act as a sort of a drain system around the building. So first of all, we're going to grab our internal gravel fill. So just click on that and just drop that in, and then we'll slide it to this back corner. Okay, like that. So that lines everything up there, and then we get the stepping back as we've seen on the finished article at the front. Okay, the next thing is to blind off the top of this with some sand. Now the blinding is going to do a couple of things. It's going to certainly protect any membranes you put on top from being punctured, especially if you pour a concrete slab on top of it. We will be putting our closed cell PIR insulation on top of the sand, and then we'll be putting our membrane on top of that. Other people might want to put the membrane down first and the insulation on top of that, but I'm just making sure I've got adequate protection for the membrane. So a bit of sand and a bit of insulation, nothing's going to get through that. So if we come down to the S's, we are looking for sand blinding, and we'll just drop this sort of again into this back corner. Okay, so it's about 2 inches, 50 mil of sand blinding, and that's our prepared piece for the slab. So very simple. All the bits and pieces are created. As you can see, there's nothing too exciting about any of these. Just a simple shape following sort of the difference between this earth and the wall. So again, just draw that sort of shape and extrude it, and then right click after triple clicking and turn it into a component. And similarly this, just a rectangle, extruded 2 inches or 50 mil. That's the sand blinding. So all these things are super easy to make. So I didn't see the point of getting anyone to actually make these things. It would speed up the whole process if we could just drag this stuff in. Understanding the sequencing is all important. Okay, so next up we'll be adding the membrane and the insulation, and then we can put the mesh on to pour the slab into. Chapter 305, we're putting in some insulation now, and then we'll put the membrane on top of that. So the membrane is going to come over the slab, and it's going to come over the top of our wall, underneath the sole plate, and basically wrap around the wall, cover the wall, and then just come over to the foundation as well. So we're protecting this wall from any moisture ingress from the outside. Because it's cold, it might get a situation where freeze and thaw might occur. So you want to make sure that the small amount of moisture as possible getting into this wall. So first up, if we come down to the bottom of our components, slab insulation, just click on that, and then we can drop that in to this back edge, and then come around to the back and pick this bottom corner and just drop it into there. Okay, it should line up and step back like everything else. And then we're going to make a copy of it. So with the move tool, tap the control key or the alt option key on the Mac. And then we've got a situation where we've got a joint running through here. Now, it's never a good idea to have sort of joints sort of all lined through. We possibly want to stagger our joints wherever possible. So I'm going to rotate that by clicking on one of the red crosses and then coming over. Because it's a group or a component, if we hover over these things, you get these little red crosses appear. And if you hover over the red cross, then you get that protractor. And any red cross will do. And the sides have the same sort of thing. just a different color protractor depending on the axis. And then we can just click on that and rotate through. So it's a nice, easy way of doing that. We've also got to protect the inside. So we're going to put some perimeter insulation along here. So just go up to the P's, perimeter slab insulation, click on that, and let's just drop that in to this point. So just make sure it's come down all the way to that bit there. So that should line through with that and line through with the back there. Okay, so our perimeter insulation is lined up with the top of the wall. Now, if you've got any slight discrepancy due to the 3/8 of an inch versus a millimeter or 10 mil thing, then we could just maybe select this and use the scale tool just to pull it up or down, just to line it through with the top. That will help any little discrepancies, but in reality, this will be cut on site with a knife and it wouldn't be a nice clean edge probably. And so there's always going to be a little bit of discrepancy. It's always much neater when you are modeling than it would be if you were trying to dig holes and put things in and line things up on a building site. Okay, so these are always going to be much, much neater than they are in reality. So now we go to our S's again, down to the Sill base membrane. And we click on this, bring it in, and I've put the origin point of this, the axis origin point, a little bit further away from the object. So if I snap to this back corner here, then it should just sit nicely on. Because it's so thin, SketchUp does that thing where you can see through these bits and pieces, so you might not think that it's actually in place. I think I've made it 1 or 2 mil, which is 1 or 2 mil or 1 mil, certainly thicker than it would be in reality. But it does help to allow us to sort of render this up and select it. Okay, if it was just one thin line with no depth to it, then it would be even harder to select. Okay, so that's the reason why I did that. It's not quite as thick in reality. So now we've got our membrane. We've got our insulation, our perimeter insulation, so we're protected on the inside. And again, depending on the code, depending in the UK, certainly on a P over A, a perimeter over area calculation that you have to do as well, depending on whether you're in a terraced house or a semi-detached or a detached house, you'll have different thicknesses of slab. So again, check out the requirements and then design accordingly. So now we've insulated below the slab. It's time to put some spacers in, add the mesh, and then we can pour our concrete slab. Chapter 306, we're now going to place our reinforcing mesh, okay, into this area. This is where we're going to pour our slab. And the mesh comes in, but it doesn't sit on the bottom. It is going to act close to the bottom because it's going to be used to add a little bit of tensile strength to our slab. Concrete is very good in compression, but not very good in tension. So the metal inside the concrete helps with that extra tensile strength. And we're going to use our 193, so A193 mesh. So just click on that and bring it in. It's just a load of tubes at 90 degrees to each other, sort of all joined up. And we're going to come down and we're going to find under the M mesh spacer. Okay, that's important. Bring this in because the mesh spacer is going to lift this off the deck. This is a precast concrete mesh spacer, so we carry on the sort of slab integrity, but very important that this doesn't get too close to the outside edge. Normally there's something called cover, which is the distance between this mesh and the outside edge, and these things certainly help to achieve that distance. Okay, so I'm just going to lift this mesh up to that point. So I'll click underneath it and just pop it into position. Missed there. And again, so I'll try again this time. That's better. So that's kind of in the right sort of spot now to slide it along. So it just sits in there, something like that. And I've also got to check that my mesh isn't too close to this point here. So little dimension, click to the wall. That's 52 mil. So that's going to be fine. It's over 40 mil. So no problem there. So click on this. Then I'm going to copy this to the far edge and just eyeball it in as it would be done on site. Then use the / and enter 2 and then hit enter. That's going to then divide this up. So it's sort of a backwards array where you copy to the furthest distance and then divide by the number. So that's that bit done. Now we're going to select the mesh and copy it. Just click on the end and run it all the way down and snap it to that point. So now we've got sort of two meshes. It oversails a little bit. So what we could do is select the mesh and just slide it along. And this would often be the case. It wouldn't just sort of sit end to end. We'd slide it up and then tie it together with little bits of wire. So there you go. It's hanging correctly there. And now we can select our three spaces. 1, 2, 3. And if we then use the move tool and hit the control key, alt option the Mac, we'll copy it all the way down on the green axis to maybe this point, something like that. Then use the / key. So divide by, let's say, probably about 3, enter. That should then give us enough of support. Now they're not exactly in the right space, so let's just move them. Again, it's just eyeball them in. And if you lose the axis, use the back arrow on the keyboard. That's going to lock it in the green direction. And then you can zoom in a bit. And similarly, these, and again, move tool, I'll use the back arrow and then that'll lock out on the green axis. There you go. So there is our reinforcing mesh, our spacers. Now this has been sitting on site for a little bit. It's nice and rusty. So the rust adds to the adhesion with the concrete and also, more importantly, stops the oxidization process when this metal or this mesh is in the concrete. Okay, so it got a nice bond with that concrete. So next we can add the slab and then we are nearly done with our sort of below ground, below floor works. Chapter 307. We're going to now pour our slab and we're going to put a bit of backfill in this area as well and our perimeter drain. And we'll then put a bit of screed on top before we then would apply the floor finish. The floor finish is going to go on at the last possible moment because as we're doing the construction inside of our building, we certainly don't want to mess up that lovely sort of latexy, concretey floor. Okay, so the first thing that's going in is a floor slab. There's a screed to go on top. So floor slab first. This is, I think it's about 6 inches, 150 mil. Yeah, so a 6-inch C25 I've put in here. That's a 25 newtons per millimeter square, which gives us a PSI, if you're interested, of 3,426, I believe. So we can line this through with the back. So this concrete slab is made up of cement, aggregate, sand, and water. Okay, so that's how you mix up concrete, and the different amounts of aggregate versus sand versus cement and water will give you different strengths for different purposes. But the C25 is pretty universal as a general sort of useful concrete. So that's gone in. We'll use the screed next because it's above the floor slab. So we'll just drop that in as well and just come back to this corner and line it through like so. And then we can come outside and add some gravel with has a pipe in it, and then we'll put our grade on top. So if we come down to pipe gravel backfill and pick that up, then that's going to go sort of in line with this back corner. Oops, no, it steps in here. Sorry. We've got another piece that comes over the top of that. So that steps in and sits at that point. So the gravel is then filling up this space. There's a pipe to go into the back. So that is under perimeter. Or perforated, I beg your pardon. So perforated drain. Let's grab that. Let's drop that in. And if we come around to this back face, and then we pick it up from its sort of top node point on the circle, this faceted circle, and then we drop it in at that point there. Okay, so orientate around a little bit. That should help with the positioning of that. And that's going to poke out at this point. So that's that bit. And then the last bit is to put in the floor slab sort of grade outside. So I think that is somewhere up here. Slab backfill external. Okay, the naming conventions aren't necessarily possibly the best, but it's in there. So again, we've positioned this so it lines through the back. And there we have it. Okay, so now we've got a bit of backfilling there, a bit more stability on this wall. We've put our slab in so we can kind of work inside now nice and comfortably. We've put temporary steps to get access into this, so we're not going to fall over this sort of gap. Ultimately, the latex screed is going to go on, but that'll probably be one of the last things that goes in, because you don't want to ruin that floor whilst the rest of the construction is taking place. So we can work happily on this screed before we put the final floor in. So this is now showing us pretty much a decent makeup of the ground. We've stripped back everything to a decent level. We've then used some hardcore to give us a nice solid, decent level base. We've protected that then with some sand. Then comes our insulation and our membranes, and then we pour the concrete. We've got perimeter insulation along here, membranes over the top and coming down the wall behind all this stuff, steps over there. So we've got our perimeter drain, which is like a French drain, so water can come in there and then disperse at low level. And we've got this sort of compacted grade on the outside, which is tapered back to a fall. So that's pretty much it. We've got the timber sole plate to go on next, and that's going to come up to about here because the wall doesn't go all the way along. We've got a door coming in here as well with windows above. So we'll put that on next, and we'll show you how the little timber bolts anchor into this concrete, and then we can start building up our walls. Chapter 308, this is the last one in this chapter. We're going to get up to our sole plates or timber sill. It's often called a mud sill as well. And that's a lump of wood basically that sits on this wall. Now, we're not going to have it all the way along the wall because we've got a threshold, a door threshold to come in as well along this back part of the wall. But the lump of wood, the 6x2 sole plate, is sitting near the top. So we can pick that up and drag it across. This is going to line through external edge there with the external edge of the wall. My membrane sits a bit further over, but let's not worry too much about that. That's going to be fine for this. So line it up with that. I'm not sure whether we need to adjust this a little bit later, but other considerations would be things like termite shields and whether you need damp-proof courses under here as well. All these sorts of things need consideration. This is the junction between sort of the below ground stuff and then the above bits. So key considerations need to be taken at this point. So we come down to the S for sill anchor, and that's then going to be used to anchor this into the wall. Okay, so we don't want this to move. It's going to take and spread load from the wall and the roof. So these anchors are going to sit into these bits of concrete. So you position them, set them, drill holes in the sole plate and set it over the top. Other methods could be to drill holes in this or through this and put expanding bolts in. You could even use epoxy resin, those sorts of finishes for that. But this is going to come down to the top. So I'll just slide this along just ever so slightly. So it's going to sit pretty much centrally in that lump of concrete. And then I'm just going to grab the underside of this washer and just bring it vertically down and sort of drop it into place like so. Okay, now this might need to be recessed if you've got any other bits of timber or the threshold of the door coming over it. But in this case, these should be fine as long as they miss the uprights. So I'm just going to copy this along. So copy it to a few other places. Now, X-ray mode would be useful for this, but I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and say roundabouts there. And then I'll go 2x, enter, and hope that it's hit one of these pockets. I'll just turn the X-ray mode on. It hasn't. That one has, but this one hasn't. So I can just select this and just move it along a little bit. I think I'll turn X-ray mode off to make life a little bit easier. It's round about there. Okay, so that'll be good enough. Equally spaced or as close to equally spaced as possible to spread, again, that fixing along it. And that's pretty much it. So all of our below ground works now are pretty much done. We're up to DPC course or sole plate, and now we're ready to start constructing above that. So there you go. That's an introduction to sort of the below ground works. Quite a lot of stuff that goes on. It's never going to be as neat as this in reality, There'll be mud and stuff all over the place. Okay, so just bear in mind that if it doesn't quite look like this on site, do not panic.